Cancer is a dreaded disease in our countries and other countries around the world because it seems to be so mysterious. And more than that, the consequences of cancer seem to be almost universally fatal. And the death, of course, in cancer is something that nobody wishes to experience. So that the investigation, what causes cancer, has been going at a rather furious pace for many years. The first concept was that viruses somehow cause cancer as a major source because we know what happens in animals. But the United States National Cancer Institute has spent $50 or $100 million a year for 20 years and has never gotten a clue on the viral cause of cancer. And I believe that the research is going to find that if viruses indeed are responsible for any of human cancer, it's going to be so small to be of little consequence. Because now we realize that the major causes of cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, and even lung cancer, are dietary caused or dietary controlled. Of course, we know that the principal stimulus to lung cancer is cigarettes in 90% of the cases. So it is a different kind of investigation that National Cancer Institute is looking at now. Remember, they're the federal agency that gets $1 billion a year of your tax money to try and find out what to do with cancer. You might say that the trends that have been developing finally let themselves be known when last October, that is October 1979, Dr. Arthur Upton, who was director at that time of the National Cancer Institute, made a public statement. And what he said was, heretofore, when people ask us what diet we recommend to avoid cancer, we couldn't tell them. We didn't know enough to make a dietary recommendation. For all the years we've been in business, we haven't been able to make one dietary recommendation. However, now, October 79, we're making our first dietary recommendation. And it was interesting as to what Dr. Upton said. Because first of all, he said, you've got to cut down eating so many polyunsaturated fats. Well, that was curious because that's what the American Heart Association has been telling us to eat all these years. Why is the Dr. Upton says you've got to stop eating those polyunsaturates? Well, it's easy enough. Dr. Upton said that the polyunsaturated fats in animal studies have been shown to substantially increase colon or bowel cancer. Therefore, we can't recommend it. How about total fats? That's something else. Dr. Upton said you've got to cut down all fats from your diet because the evidence is so strong now that total fats are directly correlated to breast cancer and also prostate cancer. In countries where the highest amount of fat is consumed per person, you have the highest amount of breast cancer in the world. In countries on the lowest amount of fat in the world, you have the lowest amount of breast cancer in the world. It's just what we call a straight line relationship. And Dr. Upton closed by saying, my recommendation is to increase your intake of whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. Well, that should sound familiar to you, because that's our recommendation. Considering this the very first recommendation for cancer, I think we have to look back at it and see the basis of Dr. Upton's recommendations. Well, first of all, as far as colon cancer is number 2 in our country, 50 or so thousand deaths a year, and the investigations in colon cancer gone back a way. Dr. Dennis Burkitt of England has had some thoughts on it, and Dr. Ernst Winder, president of the American Health Foundation in New York, has done a lot of work on it, and I can put you up to date on what the current concepts are. On the normal high-fat diet that the average American eats, it takes a certain amount of bile to help digest that fat. In fact, the amount of bile that the average American makes to digest the amount of fat he eats is anywhere up to 10 times more bile than you require with the diet that I recommend. Well, this tremendous amount of bile sets up an environment in the intestinal tract, the large intestine, for a certain kind of bacteria to grow very well, the anaerobic bacteria. Because these bile-eating bacteria actually love to live in this atmosphere. They take the bile and they eat it, and their excretion products, their bowel movement, is the breakdown products of bile. One of the breakdown products is called deoxycholic acid, which we know is carcinogenic or co-carcinogenic, and also a certain kind of hormone that is absorbed back into the blood and sort of stimulates the sex target organs. Now, on the high-fat diet, that makes this environment possible in order to grow these bacteria. The tragedy is that only in those countries that are on high-fat diets do you find these kind of anaerobic bacteria. And only in these countries that have a high amount of anaerobic bacteria and that their breakdown products of bile called deoxycholic acid exist, you find bowel cancer. In fact, you don't find bowel cancer unless you have a high amount of this cancer-producing substance produced by the bacteria in your large intestine. Now, you may be curious as to how bacteria, these little one-cell animals, so tiny you can't see them without a microscope, can create this problem. It'd be easier to understand when you know how many bacteria you have in your last 4 feet of tubing, your large intestine. You have more bacteria in your last 4 feet of tubing than there are people in the world. There's 4 or 5 billion people in the world, but you have more bacteria than that. And they're all living very peacefully in your large intestine, enjoying your bile as it comes down, and living well off the fat of your land. They don't pay any rent. They do you nothing but a disservice if they're anaerobic bacteria. In fact, you have so much bacteria in your bowel that if you sampled your bowel movement for 24 hours, 1/4 to 1/3 of the total weight of your bowel movement would be in your own bacteria. You produce so much bacteria that every single day, 1/4 to 1/3 of your bowel movement is in your own bacteria. They multiply tremendously fast. One of these little bacterium, because they multiply about every 20 minutes, in 8 hours can produce 2 million bacteria. So you can see where you can have plenty of them to spare every day. Now, in addition to the problem of the deoxycholic acid, which incidentally, the good bacteria that you would have if you were on the low-fat diet, because on that diet, anaerobic bacteria are so small in the intestinal tract that they hardly count. The major bacteria on the low-fat diet is called aerobic bacteria. They live without oxygen, and they do not have the power to eat bile, so they can't make the carcinogenic byproduct, deoxycholic acid. So the big thought now in colon cancer is to go back to low-fat diets, and that's one thing that Dr. Upton would like to see us do.